Despite an assault on transgender rights in 2020, a landmark ruling by the Supreme Court made it illegal to fire someone for being LGBTQ. There's a long way to go to achieve justice and equality for transgender people in the U.S., but there is momentum. Dr. Jenny Beeman is the director of the Stonewall Center at the University of Massachusetts Amherst and a leading expert on the experiences of trans people and the development of policies and practices in college communities. Dr. Beeman, thank you so much for taking some time for us today.
You're very welcome. It's my pleasure.
Joe Biden became the first U.S. president-elect in history to acknowledge the transgender community in his victory speech. The election saw more transgender officials elected to office, and then there was that landmark Supreme Court ruling. What has all this meant in terms of transgender visibility on the political stage?
Well, let me start by saying that we've witnessed over the past 4 years the most anti-trans presidential administration in history. One estimate is that in just 4 years, the administration has taken more than 150 anti-trans actions, everything from removing gender identity non-discrimination from federal agencies and programs to reinterpreting Title IX to exclude trans students so that schools do not have to protect the rights of trans students, to promoting a policy that says that businesses, employers, healthcare agencies can discriminate legally against trans people under the guise of religious beliefs. So I wasn't expecting a whole lot from 2020 in terms of trans progress. So the glimmers of hope we've had this year have really been unexpected. You know, the ruling you mentioned in Harris Funeral Homes versus the EEOC, in which sex discrimination under Title IX has been now interpreted to include gender identity, sexual orientation. That is just huge. That is really game-changing. You think of all the institutions, all the businesses that have sex discrimination protection, and now trans people are potentially included in all of those policies. And also the political gains this year were pretty unexpected, I think, as well. You know, having Sarah McBride, the first out trans state senator, to be elected in a blue state like Delaware, that wasn't really surprising. But having Mauree Turner, the first non-binary person to win a state House seat in bright red Oklahoma, that was a huge surprise, as well as having an indigenous trans person, Stephanie Byers, being elected in Kansas. Not something we would have expected. You know, it shows that trans people can win outside of liberal bastions, and also that trans people can be seen as more than just their gender identities.
Well, trans visibility in entertainment is also at historic levels. We're seeing more transgender characters in TV, film, and pop culture. It's hard to believe it's been a decade since Chaz Bono was Dancing with the Stars. What are the impacts of those characters and their stories?
Well, I would say first that the representation still is not that great. For the past 4 years, there has not been a major trans character in a Hollywood film. And trans characters are still often portrayed by cisgender people. And while we've seen certainly gains for trans women in TV on the small screen, trans men, non-binary people are still largely invisible. But all that said, yes, we definitely have seen some fantastic gains in the last 4 years. And that can't be underestimated for the effects that that has on trans people, particularly on trans youth, to see themselves reflected in popular culture. You know, it's hard to embrace an identity if you don't know or know of people who identify that way. So you're better able to accept yourself and to have one's family accept you. You know, parents want to envision the best for their kids. They want to think of them having a happy and healthy future. And most cis parents don't know personally any trans people. So what do they rely on? They rely upon images that they see of trans people. And what do they see? Well, they see trans people portrayed as psychopaths, as killers. as those who were killed. And of course, if you look at the media, there are so many trans people that are killed, and that's often the only coverage you see. That's not a pretty picture for parents to think of when it comes to envisioning a future for their trans kids. That's changing. As it changed for lesbian and gay people in representations in the late 1990s, early 2000s. You know, you see this with Ellen DeGeneres when she came out, and her character on her TV show Ellen came out in 1997. That was hard for a lot of people to accept. And the show got canceled the following year because it was not something that businesses wanted to sponsor, and not a lot of people were watching. Well, fast forward 5 years, and she gets a TV talk show, and it becomes hugely popular. She hasn't changed in that 5 years. You know, she's still an out lesbian, but the culture changed, and so that it was not such a big deal. So that a lesbian, particularly a white lesbian, coming out to their family, they're going to think of Ellen. You know, she's funny, she's cute. Okay, my kid will be like Ellen. I can still imagine them having a bright future. So many same-sex couples have kids. I can still have the grandkids. That's not something they've been able to imagine for trans people. That's starting to change, and so hopefully in a few years or a decade, we'll be able to have those images of trans people widespread enough that families can see a bright future for their trans kids and be more accepting of them.
Well, as an expert in the development of transgender policies and practices in college communities, how have you seen these wider trends affecting the lives of trans students?
We have more out trans people, more out trans youth in particular today than we've ever had before because of the greater visibility of trans people, particularly more and more trans youth identifying as non-binary. I identify as non-binary and have since the late 1990s when I saw the word genderqueer started to appear on the internet. But for more than a decade, I didn't know other genderqueer people. And when I started meeting them, they were the college students that I was working with. And I did a study in 2014 of non-binary trans people and found that the majority didn't start identifying as non-binary until they got to college and met other people who were non-binary, and sort of a light bulb went off in their heads and they said, oh, wow, this really explains my experiences. I never really had a word for it. I never know what it meant. I just thought it was different, and I couldn't really figure out what it was, and now I get it. That's changing in just the past 5 years. Now I see more and more high school students and junior high school students identifying as non-binary. So having these images, having representation really matters because people can see themselves and see themselves in other people.
Well, it certainly helps, but there's certainly still a long way to go. Your research on transgender college students describes the challenges that they face and the struggle to feel safe within their schools. What supports are still needed for trans youth?
Oh God, what aren't? Harassment against trans students, particularly in high school, junior highs, is still really widespread and needs to be seriously addressed. Institutionally, schools and colleges need to have gender-inclusive restrooms throughout their institutions. Students need to be able to have a name that they go by, pronouns on course rosters and records so they can be their authentic selves. College housing needs to be assigned based upon gender identity rather than what's on legal documents. Athletic facilities, rec facilities need to have facilities that are private so that trans students can have showers where they're not going to be having to expose their bodies to other folks. Hormones and gender affirming surgeries need to be covered by student health insurances in college. There are just a whole host of policies that need to be put in place to support trans students. You know, we've seen more parents becoming accepting of trans students in the past decade, but still really commonplace for trans students to face rejections and sometimes be kicked out of the house for being trans. And so colleges need to find ways to be supporting those students and giving them independent status so that they can attend college.
Well, 2020 has also been a year of extreme violence against trans people in the US. Trans activists have been instrumental in the Black Lives Matter movement. How disproportionately affected are trans people of color by transphobia?
Well, last week was the International Trans Day of Remembrance on November 20th, an annual day to mark all those who have been killed because of their gender identity. And in the year from October 1st of 2019 to October 1st of this year, there have been more than 50 documented cases of individuals killed because of their gender identities, probably a huge number more that have not been documented that we don't know about because they were not reported in the media or not reported as hate crimes. The vast majority of those individuals were brown and Black trans women. And we see that really all forms of violence, that trans women of color are much more likely to be victimized than are white trans people. Same thing with harassment, discrimination, and all facets of society, that trans women of color experience the highest rates. So really disproportionate violence experienced by trans women of color particularly. Black Lives Matter has just been amazing to see just how they have incorporated Trans Lives Matter into that. It's such a great example for other movements to follow on how they can really be trans inclusive and trans supportive.
Well, moving forward, what do you see as the next fight in the movement for trans rights?
Well, for starters, with the new administration to reverse all those 150 some Trump practices, policies against trans people. I would also say passing the Equality Act, which would ban discrimination based upon gender identity and sexual orientation in housing, employment, credit, public spaces and services. The vast majority of people in the US think that trans people are already covered by non-discrimination laws nationwide. In fact, the majority of trans people themselves think that they are covered nationwide by non-discrimination policies, when in fact, only about half the states have any form of non-discrimination policy protecting trans people. So we need to have a policy in place to protect trans people across the board from discrimination. And then, of course, moving forward, we need to take that Title VII ruling that protects trans people under sex discrimination and making that law in all facets where sex discrimination is in place.
Well, it has certainly been an intense year of ups and downs and wins and losses. And Dr. Beeman, we thank you so much for bringing us up to date on this critically important social issue.
You're very welcome. Thank you.